Welcome everybody who's entering.
We will be starting in just a few minutes here. I'm going to give everyone else a minute to join in, but thank you all who have joined us already.
Hi, Dr. Laurel.
Hello, Dr. Gabrielle.
How you doing?
I'm doing great today, and it's a beautiful spring day. I hope it is there for you.
It is, thank you.
Well, let's go ahead and start. If you'd go to the next slide. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Dr. Laurel Matthews, one of the naturopathic doctors and product designers here on staff at Energique. We're very pleased that Dr. Gabrielle Francis is here today to share her expertise on leaky gut and immunity. Remember, if you can't hear through your computer well enough, you can dial in on your phone. If you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box. You'll see a Q&A chat box that will pop up at the bottom of the screen, and our staff will message you right back. Anything we can't answer, Dr. G will respond to at the end when we have our question and answer period. Next slide, please. The information in this webinar is for licensed medical professionals only, not for distribution to patients. The information in this webinar is I'm sorry about that. Such professionals need to make their own assessment of their individual patients based on all applicable factors. All information in this webinar is the sole responsibility of the presenter and is not reviewed or approved by Energique brands and affiliates. Energique products are not intended to diagnose, mitigate, treat, cure, or prevent any disease, damage, or dysfunction. And now I'd like to turn the microphone over to Dr. Gabrielle Francis. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Dr. Laurel, Jana, John Russo, and everybody at Energique. It's an honor to be here. It's really exciting for me because I have an affinity for the idea of treating leaky gut and the gut in general. I am a naturopathic doctor, chiropractor, and acupuncturist. I've been in practice for over 35 years. I'm currently practicing in New York City as the Urban Alchemist. That's a play on words. And I am also the author of the Rockstar Remedies. So part of my long career has involved touring with rock bands and working as their doctor on tour. And basically, one of the things I found being on tour with rock groups is that they wanted to be healthy and live their intense, indulgent lives. And when I started to really work with normal people, I found that they were not that different than rock stars. They're living these overstretched, busy lives, traveling, indulging, and they wanted to be healthy too. So a lot of the strategies I was using with rock stars, I was using with my regular patients, and that's the premise of this book, is really to how to make living in today's modern world which involves a lot of intensity and celebration, something that could still be worked in with a healthy lifestyle as well. So love to have you guys join by reading my book sometime. And we are going to talk about the objectives of this seminar, Leaky Gut and Immunity. First, we'll identify the structure and location of the GALT, the gut-associated lymphatic tissue. We'll understand the functions of the GALT and its role as an immune organ. Identify the causes of the leaky gut, or also known as intestinal hyperpermeability. We're going to review the symptoms, diseases associated with leaky gut syndrome, and then we're going to learn foods and supplements that help to repair the gut and enhance immunity. So let's join me on this adventure. And it goes way back, the study of the gut and immunity, all the way back to Hippocrates. All disease begins with the gut. And why focus on the gut? Because in my practice, what I find is that it literally improves patient treatment outcomes for almost all disease spectrums. I look at the gut as the foundation. It's the foundation, it's how we absorb, it's how we eliminate, and from there we do the building. Often when patients come in, I'll say, you know, when a building comes down, they don't just go and put a new building on that site. First, they have to clean the area and build a solid foundation. When the solid foundation's in order, then everything you do to build on top of that works so much better. And that's the best metaphor I can use for understanding the gut. The gut is the foundation to follow with a lot of our other treatments. Detoxification, for example, often people are doing detoxes, whether it's a cellular detox involving chlorophyll-based products. Chlorophyll takes toxins from the cells, binds to them, binds to the toxins, pulls them out of the cells into the blood. From the blood, things get filtered through the liver. And in the liver, you have to go through a phase 1, phase 2 detoxification enzyme pathways. And from there, the toxins are dumped into the gut. So before there's any type of detoxification, whether cellular or liver, I think it's really important to make sure that the gut is working properly and that it's in balance so that the body can handle the toxins being dumped out. Very similarly with parasite and dysbiosis treatment, it's very important to make sure that the gut foundation is in order, because when you start to kill off microbes, whether you're using herbs or medications, those microbes give off a poison. So before you start to unleash poisons by killing off infections, it's very important to make sure that the gut lining and the border wall is intact. The gut is the foundation of immune repair. Actually, 2/3 of the immune system is the gut lining, and it makes a difference in how our body is affected with allergies and autoimmunity. So we're going to talk about that extensively later. But also we need the solid gut foundation in order for everything else we do, whether it's adding nutrients, balancing hormones, treating adrenal glands. One thing I see in practice often that I really see patients coming from other practitioners and they're on all kinds of supplements, or even the fact that that patient might be eating really healthy, but it just doesn't seem like things are getting absorbed. And to me, this is expensive poop and pee. We can be eating all this great food and we could be taking all these supplements, but if your body can't absorb that, what good does it do? So to me, the gut is the foundation to start with before we do any of these other treatment modalities. So we want to look at the key aspects of gut function. We have the digestion, absorption, elimination. We have the permeability function, which is letting in the good things, keeping out the bad things. We have the microbiome. You know, the gut houses a massive microbiome that actually has a lot of genome to it through all those microbial interfaces. We have immune modulation in the gut, and we have the entire neurology of the gut, the enteric nervous system. So this is a picture that kind of just gives us a little overview of the gut, the general GI tract. As we know, digestion starts with the salivary glands in the mouth, and the salivary glands produce the enzymes that break down mostly carbohydrates, and that comes with chewing. The salivary glands and the enzymes also stimulate the stomach and the parietal cells of the stomach to produce hydrochloric acid and pepsin. So it's with chewing that we get the activation of the stomach enzymes. After food is chewed and masticated well here, it passes through the esophagus into the stomach. There is a border right here, which would be our diaphragm. I'll talk about that in a minute. Once we get into the stomach, basically the stomach produces HCl and pepsin, which are primarily involved in the digestion of protein and some fats. And once food enters the stomach valve closes, and it basically starts that digestion for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. The stomach digestion is where the proteins are broken down into amino acids, fats are broken into fatty acids, and that stomach acid is also very important for the absorption of B12, folic acid, B6, and all of our minerals. Okay, so we know how important that is. One thing I guess I'll talk about it right now, is that there is that principle of not food combining. Yes, I guess it's food combining, where people will talk about that simple sugars need to be eaten away from protein and fat. And the whole principle of food combining is really based on the fact that that stomach closes. Its primarily function is to produce the enzymes to break down protein and fat, but not really carbohydrates. That's not really a problem with complex carbohydrates, which break down slow, but simple carbs break down very quickly. So if you eat a meal that has proteins and fats and then simple sugar at the same time, what often happens is those simple sugars will start to rapidly decompose, and then they start to ferment. And then that starts mixing with the proteins, causing putrefaction, the fats causing rancidification. And after that hour and a half, 2 hours, when the stomach finally opens, what's getting released into the small intestine is not a lot of pre-digested nutrients, but a bolus full of toxic waste. So the principles of food combining really involve that we want to eat our simple sugars either an hour before or 2 hours after foods with protein. Once foods come through the stomach, we have the addition of the pancreatic enzymes, bile salts. They add to our small intestine enzymes, and in the small intestine we have the further digestion of proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and here we have the absorption of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates as well. All the toxins and remaining wastes enter the large intestine, and the large intestine is responsible for the elimination of waste and the absorption of water. One other thing to think about, I know there's some chiropractors on here, I'm also a chiropractor, and as we think about the diaphragm right here, and a lot of you may have heard about a hiatal hernia. What's happening with the hiatal hernia is the top of the stomach here is prolapsing up through the diaphragm and into the esophagus, and it causes a jamming. There's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, we have structurally, a lot of people now are slouching a lot. Maybe even people who are doing a lot of ab exercises, they're contracting their abdomen. They're sitting in a curved shape, and that can structurally cause that jamming. Also, if there's inappropriate stomach enzymes and things aren't getting broken down properly, we're going to have an inflation of the stomach or a swelling of the stomach, which can cause it to go jamming up there. And often if there's dysbiosis, whether it's candida or other types of microbes that are causing some kind of swelling of the stomach, stomach swells, goes up through the diaphragm, jams into the esophagus. So chiropractors do have a technique where we manually can pull out that hiatal hernia. But one of the things that's very important to think about is there is a structural component to gut and stomach health as well. And this is just a review again of what we just talked about. Very interesting, we're going to be talking more about the mucosal aspect, the GALT, the gut-associated lymphatic tissue, which is part of a larger system called the MALT, mucosal associated lymphatic tissue. Everything we're talking about in reference to the gut can also be associated to the lymphatics of the bronchial, nasal, larynx, the vulva, the testes. So, you know, clinically in practice, for example, somebody might come into me and they have chronic vaginal infections, or they may be getting frequent respiratory infections or sinus infections. So that understanding of that border wall and the treatment of it, even though we may be focusing on the gut, is really going to have implications along that entire mucosal highway. That entire thing is called our border wall, okay? The structure of the gall involves villi, which add to the surface area for absorption. Probiotics, our microbiome lines the surface of the mucosa. There's the epithelial layer, connective tissue, and then we have our lymphatic layer, which includes the antibodies, B cells, and secretory IgA. So here's a picture, and we would look at this area over here to the right as being the lumen. This is where the food comes down. If this were the respiratory tract, this is where the air is, but this is the lumen, and it's more of a circular shape. We're doing a little cut of it. Here are the microbes. We have our microbiome, our healthy gut microbiota, which, by the way, we acquire our microbes, our good microbes, when we pass through the mother's vaginal canal at birth. So when babies are born C-section, they're usually born without the good microbes. This layer on top of here's the epithelial cell layer, but this layer between the microbes and the epithelial layer is the mucosal layer, the good mucus. The epithelial cells are a single layer of cells that are connected by tight junctions, which are regulated by a protein called zonulin. And this is a little mechanism that basically allows your good nutrients in, keeps the bad things out. And one thing that could be noted is that vitamin D and zinc are very important for that regulation. On the other side of the epithelial layer is the lymphatic immune system. And this is where we have our Peyer's patches, T cells, B cells, and the antibody secretory IgA. Now, secretory IgA we acquire by being breastfed. It takes approximately a year of breastfeeding for secretory IgA to be fully developed. And that's why it's often recommended that there's no introduction of allergenic foods before a year, because it takes a good year for this part of the immune system to be fully developed. And then on this side is where this whole gut lining, the GALT, interfaces with the circulatory system. So we have the lumen and the border wall all the way taking us to what gets absorbed directly into the blood. So what are the functions of the GALT? First of all, it absorbs our nutrients. When our body digests protein, fat, and carbs, we get the breakdown products, which are amino acids, fatty acids, and glucose. That's what should get absorbed. It also protects us from the toxins getting in. Those toxins could be undigested food, it could be microbes, it could be allergens. That GALT is also the border wall where the microbes, the good microbes, adhere. So many times people are taking probiotics, and I say it's going in one end and out the other because it really doesn't have that mucus barrier to attach to. Another place where we can get expensive urine. We have the production of antibodies. And this is also an important place. We know that it's the primary place for the production of neurotransmitters. I believe the number for serotonin is that about 95% of serotonin, our happy hormone, is produced in the GALT. So what we know about it is it's really like the intersection between our GI, our nervous system, our immune system, and even the endocrine system. And the reason I put the endocrine system here as well is that hormones are detoxed primarily through the liver and the probiotics of the colon. So health of the GALT also has an impact on the health of our endocrine system, and the endocrine system connects directly to the nervous system. So it is basically where all of these systems communicate with each other. So what is leaky gut? Another name for leaky gut is intestinal hyperpermeability. I find that most of my patients have heard of the term leaky gut and they identify with it. When I was doing a little research for this project, I saw that there was over 1,500 articles in PubMed on intestinal hyperpermeability, which is incredible. So it is out there, people are hearing about it, and if you teach them about it in a language that they hear, they will respond to it. So here we have a picture of the healthy GALT. We see the microbes here, a nice healthy mucus layer above there. The epithelial layers are connected, the tight junctions, and we have the lymphatic tissue here before we get to the bloodstream. With a leaky gut, we have a breakdown of that mucosal barrier, an atrophy. We have an atrophy of the epithelial layer, and we have that opening here where now what's happening is that inability to differentiate between what's good and what's bad. Instead of just the amino acids, fatty acids, and glucose passing through, we have large undigested proteins, we have microbes, we have toxins. Those make their way into the lymphatic tissue where the immune system sets off a cascade of inflammatory hormones and antibodies that identify these things as an antigen. So that gets targeted and it upregulates the entire immune system. And this is where this could eventually, if it goes on long enough, turn into an autoimmune syndrome. Because autoimmunity is when these antibodies can't stop attacking, and eventually they start to attack your own tissue. So what are the causes of leaky gut? From the food perspective, we see that gluten is an allergen, a very large molecule, difficult to digest, very inflammatory. And it's not just gluten itself, it's the amount of gluten in our diet, and also that a lot of modern foods, the modern day that wheat has been processed has been to be higher in gluten because gluten actually improves shelf life. Dairy can be an allergen for some people, especially the casein protein. Food additives, artificial sweeteners, GMOs, MSG, things like that. GMO, genetically modified. Remember that these are genetic changes in seeds so that we can create species of plants that insects won't recognize. And unfortunately, the human body doesn't recognize that as food as well. The other thing is dysbiosis and infection. So dysbiosis is an imbalance between the good bacteria and the bad bacteria. We have a healthy microbiome. but we may have exposure to virus, bacteria, candida, yeast, and parasitic infections. So parasites are any infection that doesn't belong in our body, whereas candida, yeast, and things like H. pylori may be considered what we call an opportunistic infection. So these are things that we all have naturally, but because of imbalance, they grow out of proportion. So dysbiosis can cause leaky gut, but leaky gut can also cause dysbiosis. And then we've got our medications. Chemotherapy really wreaks havoc on the gut lining. We know antibiotics, antacids, NSAIDs, steroids, alcohol, recreational drugs. So it's very important to find out your patient's history. When I'm working with patients who are doing chemotherapy, one of the main things I do to help them be able to tolerate the chemotherapy is to work on the gut lining. Stress. When we're under stress, our body secretes cortisol and adrenaline to help us deal with the stress, but cortisol is a steroid, and that can often break down the gut lining. So it's really important because you'll often see where somebody may be living a great lifestyle, they may be eating well, but they go through a period of relentless stress, and then all of a sudden it seems like their immune system is breaking down. That's part of the connection. Impaired digestion, in particular when the enzymes are low, especially in the stomach, and we have large undigested proteins coming through. Those large undigested proteins can aggravate the gut and become allergens, and they can make their way across, causing the immune system to get upregulated. All inflammation can cause the gut to break down, whether it's inflammatory diet, stress, or injuries. And leaky gut can also cause chronic inflammation. So in other words, what causes leaky gut? Well, I'd say modern life, and this is why it's so important as a place to start with your patients. And it's also one of the reasons why I don't test for leaky gut, because I really kind of see that most people have some spectrum of this. It may not be so severe that some of that testing would actually even show up, but we all usually have a little bit of this. And if people want to continue having some little bit of their modern life, whether it's the stress, where they want to continue to have coffee or a drink of alcohol here and there, we have to continue long-term gut support to be able to handle that. So what are the symptoms of leaky gut? Well, definitely all the gastrointestinal stuff, but you may want to also consider looking at the other tissues that the malt is in. So the respiratory tissue, we would see sinusitis, allergies, frequent colds and flus, outbreaks of herpes and oral ulcers, and bronchitis and asthma, which to me are leaky gut of the lungs, where the body has now developed an autoimmune response. And the gut itself will see indigestion, gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, food allergy and intolerances, IBS, heartburn, reflux. And then when we get into long stage, where we have the celiac, ulcerative colitis, and Crohn's. Regarding food allergy, one thing to think about is that food allergy can cause leaky gut, but leaky gut can also cause food allergy. So, I don't actually test for food allergy or food intolerances until I first repaired the GALT, because what I find is if the GALT lining is not intact, you're going to get a lot of false positives in those tests. We can also seek frequent UTIs, cystitis, prostatitis as far as urinary tract symptoms, vaginal symptoms such as vaginitis, vaginal atrophy, and those could also have to do with hormone imbalances as well. Chronic vaginal infections and activation of viral infections as well. And even when people are doing treatment for these kind of things, it's very important that if they're doing herbs or medications, it's important to be treating that foundation at the same time. The skin is an organ of elimination. And so if the liver and the gut and the other main organs of elimination are not able to clean out toxins, we're going to see that they come out the skin. So the skin really is a manifestation of leaky gut as well. And then we have the neurological symptoms from that malaise, the fatigue, headaches, insomnia. And these are related to the neurological connection, the ability of the gut to produce all these neurotransmitters, but also how when there's an inflammation in the bloodstream because of leaky gut, how that activates our adrenal glands, producing cortisol and adrenaline. And that's how that can get affecting like things like insomnia. So the leaky gut is one of the first things to look at on the autoimmune spectrum. And I say spectrum because it is a spectrum. People don't just go from perfect health to diabetes or perfect health to all sorts of colitis. There was that spectrum in between. And usually there's a combination of a genetic propensity, a breakdown in the GALT, some type of interference or overload of toxins, allergens, infections making their way through the GALT, and that going on long enough, activating a genetic propensity and leading into autoimmunity. So I do believe, at least for myself, that for all people with autoimmunity, I start with the GALT, and I consider it's part of that spectrum. So how do we repair it? And this is the fun part. Luckily, there's so many foods and ways that we can repair the gut and the GALT lining. And we look at it from a functional medicine approach. It's called the 5R program or 5R approach. Number one is remove. We're removing toxins, allergens, and infections. These are kind of changes in the diet as well. We're replacing enzymes such as HCl and pepsin, pancreatic enzymes, bile salts. We can determine a lot of that just by the symptoms. If we see that we're getting indigestion, gas, and bloating within the first hour to hour and a half after eating, then most likely we're dealing with stomach enzymes. If we're getting most of the gas and bloating an hour and a half to 2 hours after we eat, we're looking more at the pancreatic enzymes. And then we can also look at the types of foods that someone's having a hard time breaking down. Is it protein? Maybe it's more HCl and pepsin. Is it fats? Maybe it's the bile salt. So we can kind of determine how we replace based a lot on that. We re-inoculate. I re-inoculate with probiotics, and we feed the probiotics with prebiotics, repairing the actual mucosal lining and the epithelial layer. And then with restore, this is really restoring the lifestyle and emotional and social factors into that person's life to prevent us from getting there from the first place. Now, I do removing of toxins and allergens, replacing, re-inoculating, and repairing all at the same time, as well as some of the restore. Regarding removing of infections, and say we're doing detoxing, I always wait on those kind of interventions until I've made sure that the foundation is intact first. So the focus on the repair of the GALT. For the epithelial layer, remember that's that single cell layer. Primarily, we're looking at glutamine. Glutamine is the food for the epithelial layer. And we think about zinc and vitamin D as regulators of the zonulin and opening and closing of the gate. One of my teachers said that they open and close the Panama Canal. Glutamine is very high in the bottom foods here. So in bone broth, white rice, even though a lot of people think white rice isn't good for you, white rice is actually very high in glutamine. And that's why in a lot of functional food powders, you'll find white rice as the base. It also tends to be more hypoallergenic. We also have the collagen peptides in the high protein foods. For the antibody layer, remember we get the secretory IgA primarily from breast milk. Whey protein is the antibody in the cow dairy. We've got vitamin A, helps produce secretory IgA, colostrum, collagen peptides. And then with foods, I always recommend goat and sheep dairy because goat and sheep milk is almost identical to human milk. Helps you build up that secretory IgA. Also whey and bone broth. For the mucosal repair, we have the health of the mucosa coming from the N-acetylcysteine and N-acetylglucosamine. NAC is also a very powerful antioxidant that our liver repairs, and it helps to make glutathione, which is a very strong antioxidant. We have a wonderful pharmacopoeia of mucilaginous herbs, and this is something Energique has lots of these amazing mucilaginous herbs: aloe, slippery elm, marshmallow, licorice. We use the deglycerinated licorice just because it doesn't tend to raise blood pressure, and then plantain. And then we've got the mucousy foods, which are okra, flax seeds, chia seeds, and even the cactus and nopal in the Mexican cuisine. For probiotics, I look for comprehensive supplements that have a good balance between the bifido and lactobacillus family. Usually Saccharomyces is included in there. I will tell you from clinical practice, I do not use probiotics that have Saccharomyces. And that is just my own experience with seeing clinically that so many of my patients have candida overgrowth. And so I tend to find that Saccharomyces and the foods that are high in Saccharomyces, like kombucha, can really aggravate that. Our foods that are for our probiotics, we have the yogurt, the sauerkraut, the kimchi, tempeh and miso, and all those fermented type foods. And then prebiotics. There are prebiotics like fructooligosaccharides, FOS, and inulin that you can supplement with, and often they are also in probiotics. That's another place where in practice, I'm just saying my personal preference, I do not use probiotics with FOS because I find that they tend to make people gassy and bloated. Not everybody, but there's so many people that have that dysbiosis, the opportunistic candida, that I find this can be really aggravating. So I usually leave that out, and I try to get as much as a prebiotic by getting people to up their roughage and to take fiber supplements that have both insoluble and soluble fiber. The insoluble fiber we think of as the roughage. I say that the leaky gut repair is like laying down new pavement in the highway, whereas the fiber is a street cleaner. It's taking all that sludge and pushing it to the exit. But it's also adding bulk, helping constipation, moving things out. The soluble fiber can also help cholesterol and blood sugar balancing. And both of them really help to produce the prebiotics, which feed your probiotics. So I just refer to really get people to eat healthy fiber foods for this. Clinically, I see that the GALT takes about 3 to 4 weeks to repair when you're cleaning up the diet and adding in the nutrients. Personally, I really think that most people need a little nutrient intervention and are very happy to do it because they usually see really wonderful results with it. And then this becomes the foundation for the next phases of treatment. So I won't really add in liver detoxing or cellular detoxing until I know that the gut foundation is intact, because we don't want to be dumping toxins into a hyperpermeable GALT. It's just going to get recirculated again and add more toxic load to the body. I always use it as a foundation for the treatment of parasites, candida, or if people are even doing medications with their medical doctors where they're on antibiotics, I have them doing the gut repair and the GALT repair in the morning, and then their interventions, whether they're medical or herbal for microbes, in the afternoon, evening, and night. So that, as you know, probably, that when you're treating organisms and they die, they give off a poison, okay? So that poison is called a Herxheimer reaction. And we don't want to make the problem worse. That's first do no harm. So treating the GALT, really at the same time you're treating with these things, even if you're using herbs. Herbs are very strong and they can be very potent, and they still cause that Herxheimer. So you want to be protecting the foundation while you're doing those kind of interventions. This is the foundation for all autoimmune work, as we've discussed before. And always it's the foundation that you use before you do any building. So if somebody's had leaky gut for a long time, they're definitely going to be low in nutrients and deficiencies. They may not have been absorbing vitamins and minerals from their food or even their supplements. They might have adrenal insufficiency, hormone imbalances. So usually the order I do it in is I start with a couple weeks on GALT repair, add in some liver support, make sure that the liver can move toxins out too. Once we know the foundation, the liver and the gut, I can absorb nutrients, eliminate toxins. Then we go into the deeper cleanse of treating organisms, candida, parasites. And then once all that's taken care of, it's time to build, because after somebody's been through those kind of protocols, they need to be rebuilt. And after that, you talk about long-term maintenance. So, you know, the topic of this talk was really, we're in a time where there's so much stuff talked about the immune, and we have so many wonderful interventions that can really be helpful for improving our gut and our immunity by harnessing the power of a healthy GALT. So from here, I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Laurel, because Energique uses spagyric formulas. They have a wonderful pharmacopoeia. After she gives you an introduction, I'm going to show you how I broke down the products as to what different parts of the GALT they affect, and how you can use them in your practice. So Dr. Laurel?
Thank you so much, Dr. Gabrielle. That was a great presentation, and she's mentioning here how Energique is dedicated to producing spagyric herbal extracts, and these are indeed quite different from most herbal tinctures on the market, and we get really good feedback from practitioners like all of you on how our herbal products work for them, and it is this difference. So it's a very time-intensive extraction process, but the benefit is that we're able to get all the different medicinal compounds out of the herbal material, because we put more steps into the process. And another aspect of our spagyric processing is there's this constant recirculation that goes on in the vessel during the extraction, and we find this makes these tiny droplets where the hard-to-absorb plant polyphenols and other compounds are actually put into this natural nanoemulsion that kind of makes these compounds easier for our cells to drink in. And then at the end of the extraction process, we take the herbal material that most people discard, and we basically incinerate it until it is nothing left but this white ash. And that's where all the plant minerals are. So this gets added back into the